Okay, the last suggestion I want to make is to think about growing the temple on the basis of participants rather than members. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, it's so hard to get members, and you're all aware of how difficult that is. And watching the membership get older and watching the membership rolls decline. As we all know, there are many famous temples in Japan that have almost no members. They thrive financially, culturally, even spiritually, on the basis of really domestic tourists, and foreign tourists as well. In other words, visitors, people who come and participate in the activities that they have, or just participate in terms of going to that temple, just being there to look at this famous temple. Japanese scholars make the distinction between Dankadera, which is the temples based on membership, and Kanko Bukkyo, tourist Buddhism. And there are a lot of temples in Japan that are based on tourist Buddhism. Now, here we are in Hawaii, a major tourist destination, but temples, I don't think, have really thought about reaching out to visitors to our state. Now, not every temple has the location or the facilities or the architecture that's suitable for tourist attraction, but it seems to me that this temple in particular, the Betsuin, is a prime possibility for developing tourist Buddhism. Now, I got this idea when we were visiting the Lahaina Jodo mission, Bishop Hara, a long-time minister, as you know, who has been at Lahaina Jodo Mission. Now, Lahaina Jodo Mission is right on the ocean. It's in Lahaina. It's in a great tourist destination. But, those of you who have been there know how magnificent it is. He's got this really traditional style temple. He's got that 3-story pagoda. He has that about the quarter-size replica of the Daibutsu, the great Buddha in Kamakura. The grounds are beautiful. And, it's right on the beach, and so, people, local as well as outside, out-of-state visitors are, constantly walking by and often through the grounds in order to get to the beach. So he's got this wonderful traffic. And Bishop Hara has really capitalized, has really taken advantage of the fact that he's in a place where there are a lot of visitors who come to his temple. And it's a magnificent temple. And I asked him, I said, how were you able, because obviously it's expensive. It takes huge amount of capital money to build the temple and the pagoda and all of this. And he said, it wasn't done on membership. So our membership is too small. If I had to rely just on our membership, I wouldn't be able to do all of this. He said it's really the generosity and the donation of visitors that have made this possible. And that's not unusual when we think about how many of the temples in Japan survive financially. And while we were there, we were in the temple, and we're talking with him, asking questions about the temple. And the doors were open, but there was a kind of a little fence that he had, in front of the door to say, in effect, you can't come in here, although the doors are open. But this young couple came wandering in anyway. And my wife was kind of irritated, because here we are, we're trying to get some work done. We're interviewing the minister, and this couple wander in, they're looking around, and she whispers to me, she said, "Shall I tell them to get out of here?" I said, well, leave it up to Bishop Hara. It's his temple, we don't want to chase them away. And then to our chagrin, Bishop Hara stops our interview and he talks to them. "Oh, where are you from? Welcome to Lahaina, Do you have any questions?" I said, "Oh, man, we only got 2 hours here." And he starts talking with them. And obviously, it's something that he does all the time. He welcomes visitors. And in time, they went out of the temple, and we were able to resume our conversation. And Bishop Hara said, "You never know." He said, "You never know." He said, "Most people don't leave anything, but you never know." He He said, 25 years ago, I married a couple that wandered in here and spur of the moment, they wanted to get married. They were in their bathing suits and they said, can you marry us? He said, sure, come in, you know, and he went, he married them right there. 25 years ago, he said, last year they came back, they wanted to renew their vows. I renewed their vows and they left me a huge donation. You know, so he's in a way, to put it sort of crassly, you know, he's playing the odds. He's got, you know, but you know, how do you get the 2%? You know, you got to get the other 98% there too, and you got to treat them as well as you treat the 2%, because you don't know who might be a contributor. But even if we take it off this sort of crass, you know, financial level, but just think of the temple as being a place where there should be lots of people coming, you know, a lot of participants. The membership may be few, but there should be lots of people coming. And there can be all kinds of programs done for the public to bring them in. The Japanese Cultural Center, you might remember, was in this real financial crisis several years ago, and it was because they had no programs. Nobody was coming. The new leadership now has turned it around, and as Lenny Andrew, the executive director, says, I want this place to be noisy, I want this place to be loud, I want kids to be running around, and if you've noticed, you know, they have just a wide variety of programs. All kinds of people are coming in, far more than the number of dues-paying members that they have. So I think the idea of, you know, bringing people in, you know, they don't have to be members, but bring them in. You know, we have the facility, we have the architecture. It's interesting. People are wondering, what is that white building off Pali Highway? What is that pink building that looks like a mosque off the freeway? You know, I think we have possibilities for increasing the number of participants that can come to the temple and make the temple become a lively, meaningful place. All right, so let me end with with a kind of a vision of what Buddhism in Hawaii, not just Shinshu, but Buddhism in Hawaii could be in a kind of a grand manner. What if all of the Buddhist denominations in Hawaii got together and adopted the motto, Buddhism shall not die in these islands, and dedicate themselves to reaching out to people of all ethnicities, of all religious faiths, of all ages, in order to help alleviate their sadness and their suffering. That's the purpose. And what if this group, you know, ecumenical group, were to organize an international Buddhist youth conference and invite, say, 170 young people from the mainland, from Hawaii, of course, from Canada, China, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Burma, any place, Europe, any place, and to discuss two issues. One is how to propagate Buddhism among young people everywhere in the world. And the second is how to eliminate sectarian divisions. Right? Those were the two specific purposes for this youth conference. And what if the conference were to pass a resolution naming Hawaii as the center, the nucleus of a new Buddhism that would spread to the Pacific countries and to the rest of the world? And what if this conference were to initiate 6 mainland haulis and send them back to New York, to San Francisco, to Chicago, to Idaho, to promote this new vision of Buddhism? That's kind of a grand vision, and it's one that conceives of Buddhism in a universal and an international kind of way. It is so idealistic that it will never happen. But what if we were to sort of, you know, think big along those lines? That a crisis is an opportunity for not just saying, well, how are we going to survive, but, how are we going to really, really make a splash? Now, who would be so bold and courageous to give it a shot, something like this, or any version of something like this? Now, we cannot tell who those visionaries might be by looking into the future, by saying, okay, I see Alan Goto, he's going to be the one who's going to do this, or whoever else. We don't know. But if we look to the past, our own past right here in Hawaii, we will be able to tell who those people were. Because in 1930, and maybe it was right here in this social hall, the International Buddhist Institute, under the leadership of Bishop Myōe Imamura and Reverend Ernest Hunt, organized exactly that conference that I described. It's amazing. It seems so progressive. It seems so like something that would happen in the future, but it really did happen in our own past. And so I think progress does not always follow a straight line from the past to the present to the future. I think sometimes we have to go back to the past to get to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. We'd like at this point to be able to open up to questions. I would caution you, or this my personal request is, George has given us a lot of what we can do. We're responsible to get it done. So you don't ask him how we're going to do it. That's our job, okay? But he's given us a lot of insight in terms of where we could go and those kinds of things that we could move forward to. And so if you need clarification or you have ideas for which you would like to have George give his insights about, the floor is open for that. Not to embarrass you, Wayne, but do you have a question?
Well, I've got to admit, I'm a little taken aback because I really wasn't prepared to say anything. In fact, I was going to sit back and listen to whatever questions someone else would advance and what response George would provide. I guess Alan may have prompted me because I was sitting back looking too comfortable. And I know that Alan and I have had numerous discussions on the very topic of where should we go from here. And one of the things that we've often discussed between ourselves is there are a lot of emphasis placed on what should we do to promote ourselves, what should we do, what kinds of activities can we do, what kind of organizational changes can we make to do things. But one of the things that I think that, at least to me, it seems we've neglected, is what is our message? Oftentimes there's a lot of emphasis on, and being in a slightly political arena, there's a lot of emphasis in how you frame the message and how you present it and things like that. But one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes you can frame all you want and present all you want, but if you have a junk message, it's still a junk message, no matter how you dress it up. And so one of the things that I think that it appears to me that Buddhism in general has had difficulty with, because maybe it's complex, it's not simple, is that we don't get our message out as to what we are about. So if somebody walks up to you and says, "Oh, you're Jodo," and you say, "Oh, I'm Jodo Shinshu," okay, says, "Oh, what do you guys do?" And you know, that's the most difficult question to answer, simply and concisely, because you know, we try so hard to be accurate in the way we answer, but in doing so, we turn everybody off, because at that point they're not interested anymore. So I think, first of all, I think we need to develop that simple message that at least draws people into us, so then at least they have an opportunity to learn more. But if we don't get that first contact, it seems to me that we'll never get them, and it'll all be for naught. And so I think that's one of the things that I think that we can look at, and I don't know what's your reflection on that one. The second one that I have, that I'm going to give two and we'll sit down. So the second one that I have is there's a lot of emphasis, it seems to be, on programs. We're going to provide this program to draw people in. We're going to provide that program to draw people in. But I guess one of the observations I've had looking at guys like New Hope, for example, is I've noticed something is that initially I thought when I was looking at New Hope that people were interested because of all the programs they had and things like that. It's not their programs. If you start talking to the guys who are in New Hope, what drew them in and keeps them there is the religion. And they firmly believe in their religion. And so how do we get to that point where we can stimulate that same kind of interest and fervor in our own religion? So those are the only two comments I have.
Great, thank you very much. The reason why I started with doctrine and teaching is precisely because of the concern you expressed that I think is fairly widespread. And namely, you know, we don't know what our doctrine and teaching is in a kind of a concise, easy to explain and meaningful manner. Like any other institution, you know, religions need to, and there are enough business people in here to appreciate this. You need to market. You know, we need to advertise. We need to brand the institution and the product. You know, to put it in sort of commercial terms. What is the product? We need to be able to describe it and to define it. You know, very very clearly. And I think we do have a problem with that, which is why I think, you know, the temples need to get together, sit down and say, okay, what is our teaching? What is our message, as you put it? Now, one of the problems of having a message that, you know, is going to make sense to other people, there's a prior problem to that, and that is, what is the message that makes sense to me? What is the message that makes sense to us? Now, I read you a one-statement summary of what Shinshu teaching is, and I don't know if you relate to that or not, but I think one of the problems is that when we, you know, kind of scramble around and say, oh, what is our message, you know, what is our teaching, we ask the minister or we go to the books and we read it and we say, oh, here's our message, but it's not really our message, it's the message in the book. You know, is it really ours? And by the way, I took that one sentence summary of the teaching straight from Praises of the Buddha, which is the hymnal that's being used. So, you know, so is that a meaningful statement of what the message is? And again, part of the problem is, you know, it may not even be, even though it's our hymnal, even though it's, you know, our tradition, it may not be something that is meaningful to me. So this is why I say there needs to be a statement. It needs to be an attempt to define the doctrine that is meaningful to us. Again, dismantle, you know, the received tradition and figure out what is the message that makes sense for us. Your second point about New Hope and the attraction of religion, that it really is not just the programs, but the, you know, the religious aspect of it, is related to what I had to say about practice. So what's the practice? You know, in a way, you know, religion, every religion needs to have some kind of practice, you know, not just a message or a teaching or a philosophy or programs or, it needs to have some kind of a practice. And Shinshu has been described as being kind of like the counterpart to kind of a universalism, Christian universalism, in which there's no real religion, there's no real practice. So I think one of the key elements in order to create a practice, a real religious content, a religious activity that people can relate to, just as they relate to the religion in New Hope, is some kind of practice. And again, also the rituals and the music and all of that, that goes in to make the religious life. What is the religious life of the temple? And is that the kind of life that will appeal to other people? And if what we're currently doing is not working, then our tradition says we can do something else. He's going up. You want to go up to the mic and be ready? Yeah.
Hello, yeah, my name is Richard Tyra. I'm from Mililani. I have a question regarding, your very first, I guess the very first things you talked about doctrine, and then you talked about, mentioned like Christian religions or some other disciplines have a Bible, and their teachings are rather fixed in the sense that everything kind of falls back on the Bible and that kind of concept. And then you also mentioned about how Buddhism, the teachings is based, a lot of it is based upon sutras that have been written long after the Buddha has passed away. So sometimes I think that in terms of then developing a particular Shinshu doctrine, where it becomes maybe a little bit more difficult because we're not zeroed in on necessarily on anything that's fixed. Sometimes I think about that as at that alone, when we talk about something that's a doctrine and that's fixed, I think about us being parents, in terms of when I'm as a parent and I'm teaching my kids, it's like whatever I tell them is like I'm the law, or I'm God, and tell them this is how you should behave, because I'm reminded of that because I'm a grandfather now, and I'm watching my daughter and son-in-law teach my little daughter-in-law. I mean, my granddaughter, and then of course when I babysit, I have to discipline her also. So there's no question about what is right and wrong from what I'm teaching her. So sometimes I think, in terms of Christianity, and you say you have the 10 Commandments, that's like in terms of being a Christian, sometimes, you look at God as being the law, and this is how I should behave. So as far as being a Christian follower. So sometimes in terms of being a liberal-minded, in terms of liberalism, sometimes I feel a lot of times Buddhism is so liberal that there's nothing hard to zero in on how we should behave, why we should do these things, so that I understand you do those things and I guess you can go to heaven, or you're under the grace of God. In terms of for what we do, like you said, it's not our behavior that will determine whether we go to the Pure Land or not. But so sometimes I think that alone it makes it difficult for young people to focus in, hey, what should I believe? And then I think in a way it relates to Wayne's question too. What really is our message? What are we trying to teach the young people? So because there's a lot of it depends. Like we can say, thou shalt not kill, but there's different circumstances. We understand why people sometimes have to kill, So, but in Christianity, it's a very definite law, in terms of rules. So, I don't know if if we can resolve anything by that. But in terms of the differences between Buddhism and liberal thinking, is sometimes so nebulous that we are not gaining the youth or even other people. So they would rather go to a church like New Hope. Is something's very, because I've been to New Hope services and it's very precise. This is what God told me to do this, so this is the word of God, and we'll follow that. So I guess that's my comment. I don't know if you necessarily have a response, but I'm sure you do, though.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're affirming what I was trying to say about teaching. That we have the doctrine, but we also need to translate it into certain, precepts or some kind of advice or some kind of teaching about the different issues that we actually face. Really practical kind of issues that children as well as young adults or adults face. And what does the religion have to say? What does our religion have to say about drinking, smoking, and all of that? As I mentioned, the danger is that we become too restrictive. So you go from very liberal, which is sort of like, it's kind of vague, to being too specific. But somewhere in between, I think there can be some kind of principles that might be developed that give us some kind of guidance. And until we develop those principles, whenever we are asked, what do you stand for? What is your message? We're not going to be able to say anything. And I think that's a real detriment. So that's another area in which there has to be some kind of effort. So yes, thank you for your comment. Yes.
Is it on? But thank you again. But I wanted to add an eighth suggestion. It shouldn't be one tradition or progress. It should be the middle way. And I think our richest resource is our tradition, because we have a long history, 2,500 years, 750 years in Japan, and 120 years in Hawaii. We do have a long tradition. And I think to go back for the future, we should use our resources that we have, the tradition that we have in Hawaii, and do that oral history thing that the Big Island did. And they made a booklet, a book, and they're preserving what our ancestors did in Hawaii to build our Sangha, to build our temple, to build the Dharma in Hawaii. And that's, to me, the most exciting thing I can think about, is using the resource that we have. And that's going back for our future. We need to see Nembutsu in action, even if it is from long ago. One example is, only recently I heard one of our members actually defended our church at the bottom of the steps and did not allow the soldiers to come up into the temple. They were looking for places during World War II where they can house and have staff offices and all, and they were going to use our temple. And he actually blocked them, and he said, "You cannot use our church. You will have to kill me before I let you go and desecrate our temple," and all of that. Wow, I do not want to lose that kind of Nembutsu in action, what our members did. And that's the middle way, not totally disregarding tradition and going only for progress. It's halfway there. But I really enjoyed the 7 suggestions you had. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a key. And again, one of the oldest of the Buddhist teachings is the middle way. And I think that's what I was trying to say. You said it better than I did, in trying to avoid the extremes of being so ambiguous that we don't know what we stand for, or being too specific in terms of what we stand for, and then becoming just ideologically simple. So somehow there has to be that middle way, which is always much more complex and more difficult than being ambiguous or being very, very or overly specific. But again, that's an old Buddhist tradition. And yes, I think just so much we neglect our own history here in Hawaii. I was just asked to to write a history of Meisho-in, which is a Jodo temple in Hilo, and my wife and I were asked, and so we went over and we met with the congregation, and they gave us all kinds of materials, photographs, newspaper clippings, letters, and so on. We went through the whole thing. It was amazing. First of all, real briefly, first of all, I was really impressed with those first-generation ministers and what they did, because they had to basically make it up as they went along. You know, a totally new situation here, and you know they had to do all kinds of things in order to grow the temple, to make the temple survive. Secondly, there's a really interesting sort of arc where you have the temples really thriving, growing, you know, and you hit the Second World War, and you know everything kind of falls apart. We came across, I kept track, I think 3 temples that were burned by soldiers who were occupying the temples. A lot of temples were occupied by soldiers. There's one temple in Hawaii, Big Island, where the military took it over, and then they took over the language school building. And then when the war was over, the military turned it over to the American Legion, and the American Legion used it rent-free until 1980. And finally, you know, they had to go to court and all of that, you know. So there are all kinds of, you know, really interesting kind of stories about how, you know, unjust some of the unjustly the temples were treated. But I think, yeah, we need to know more about our own history. And in that arc, you have this, you know, rise. You come to a Second World War, you know, everything sort of falls apart. Post-war period, there's another rise, and then you hit about 1970, 1980, and there's a real decline. And that decline you can see because all of a sudden now there's an influx of ministers. I hate to keep harping on the ministers because I have tremendous respect for them, and especially the ones that come from Japan. But you have this influx of ministers who are coming from Japan who don't stay long. You know, they go back. Whereas, you know, the older Japanese ministers who came, they say, like Bishop Hara, you know, came, they're staying for their lifetime. But from about 1980 on, ministers start coming and they go back. They come, they go back, they come, they go back. And you see this real decline in the temple fortunes. And again, the need for our own training and ordaining system. Yes?
On. What a great topic, and how inspirational it is, and how opportune that we get to hear this. So thank you for bringing this message to us. You mentioned precepts, and you mentioned also that we created, and we know that the Shakyamuni himself had to go through this process. We know initially there were no precepts, and as infractions occurred, groups were held, and he would say, okay, this is how we're going to deal with this infraction. Lesser infractions, you just have to confess to a fellow monk, and greater infractions until ultimately defeat or something. I think maybe what happened, you also mentioned Dogen and some other Nichiren and so forth. They talked about sick Buddhism, sick Buddhists. They realized that, and you can understand, if you follow in these 200-something precepts and you fail, you give in to your passions, now you feel so bad because you're worthless. You know, you cannot follow the path that you've set yourself to. So you can see, it's easy to see what pre-Mahayana Buddhists had to go through, that they must have felt, well, I'm stuck into endless reincarnations. And my alternative is to follow a practice that's extremely difficult, and I can't follow it. So the Jodo Shinshu is special. And in number 8 in Mata Shok sort of is very simply explains how Jodo Shinshu fits with the others, so to speak. You know, he mentions 3 treasures. Jodo Shinshu is the Buddhahood treasure. He mentions paths or vehicles. You know, this is the Bodhisattva vehicle. And so in number 8, the thing about Shinran is he was a scholar of scholars. I mean, his notes are exceptional. So he knew all the other schools. And he acknowledges that the other schools are viable and good practices. But he says, I put my faith in my master's practice. What I think is going on now possibly is, you mentioned plantation Buddhism possibly, is we only know Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, and we haven't really explored all of Buddhism to get the total picture. Someone else had a comment earlier, it's nebulous or so forth. And the canon is so big that you can read it until it starts to repeat itself and even be maybe possibly even more confused as deeper study goes on. That is something that we shouldn't lose here, perhaps, because Shinran represents someone who's gone through this difficult path of studying the literary Buddhism and found that faith in Amida is the ultimate way, or at least the best way, because these other practices, like I described earlier, are extremely difficult and not everybody can do them. So we cannot lose that. And in our bylaws, it says if we were going to introduce new programs into our temple, they have to be Jodo Shinshu based or based in Jodo Shinshu. So if I were to say, start talking about earlier Shakyamuni or maybe some Theravada stuff at our temple, I might be breaking that bylaw by bypassing total faith in the vow and the salvation of the vow. And so I'm really grateful you brought this up, but yeah, it does create, it's going to stimulate more conversation, obviously, and some things to work out,
Maybe you need to change the bylaw. Because if you do look at other forms of Buddhism, you will see, Shinran was so new, he was called a heretic, but he wasn't the first heretic. And there are very similar ideas to Shinran's idea of salvation coming through the grace of Amida. In fact, one of the most common Mahayana ideas is the idea that everybody is already a Buddha. Therefore, you don't have to practice. And there were lots of other Buddhists before Shinran who came to that conclusion on the basis of this different idea, not on the basis of Amida. Shinran was the first to sort of base it in Amida, but similar conclusions had been based on the idea that everybody has the Buddha nature, that we're already Buddhas. Well, as Dogen himself said, if I'm already a Buddha, why do I have to practice? You don't have to become something that you already are. I am a Buddha. I don't have to practice in order to become a Buddha. There's a long tradition of Buddhists who came to that conclusion. So Shinran, yes, he is unique in terms of basing it in Amida, but he's not the first to sort of come to this idea that you don't have to practice. Yes.
Hi, Dexter Marr, Hawaii Betsuin. You mentioned our ties to Japan, and maybe it's time to grow up and leave the nest a little bit. Are there any lessons to learn from our mainland brethren, the BCA? And they're a little bit more independent, not totally, but maybe we should be, join America, or at least think more in those lines.
Yeah, I've only recently been having some fairly good contact with BCA. I gave a talk there. I've had long discussions with Bishop Ogui and some of the other ministers there. And in some ways, they strike me as being more progressive than Hawaii. And I sometimes say, if we want some kind of suggestion or advice about where we should go in the future, we should look to the east, which is California. Or even further to New York. Look to the east for wisdom. Eastern wisdom is in California for us. And in some ways, yeah, they are more progressive. In other ways, I find them more conservative. in fact, a lot more conservative than we are. And I think actually one of the great, and I'm sure this has been done before, but I think it'd be fantastic to have a conference between BCA and the Hawaii Kyodan, where you actually get together and really talk about with the people who are really doing things out there. The other thing I've discovered about BCA is there's tremendous diversity within the BCA. I mean, they talk about Northern California doesn't talk with Southern California, and the Southern Californians, they're off on their own and they don't listen. And the bishops say, "Yeah, I'm the bishop, but only of Northern California." Those guys are, they're like rebels down there. So there's tremendous diversity as well. But I think it would be very useful if we had a dialogue. Again, talking about this is really intra-faith, Shinshu to Shinshu kind of dialogue, but with BCA. They have some very interesting ministerial training programs. I did some research on ministerial training programs in Hawaii as well as BCA, and BCA has some that are kind of controversial because they seem to be so watered down. As one minister told me, he said, it's just like instant miso soup. You go through it and you're suddenly some kind of a lay minister. But they're trying, and they're trying different kinds of programs because, like everybody else, they're pretty desperate.
Yes. Just one question was, were you going to give us some kind of an outline? Because I remember we don't take notes that well. I really appreciate all of your comments.
Okay.
Then the other thing is I was going to say in terms of what is our practice, I was going to remind the delegates that, in our actions in the last few years, or actually over many years, we really have many things that we have done or do that I think contribute to our community. When I say we, not me, but all of you, our leaders have created the Living Treasures program. We started Peace Day, our juniors put the motion in for Peace Day. Of course, the Pacific Buddhist Academy is a leader in trying to figure out ways to promote peace. We're active in the Interfaith Alliance, in the Civil Unions Bill, so we kind of, I think, I see in all of those things, we really are we're trying to move to improve this community without leaving out anyone, which is, I think, a really, really important, because it's not, we're a minority, but the majority, maybe the larger body doesn't quite see it that way, and I think we have an important message. I don't know if we can get it across enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as I see it, and I've been watching the scene for a long time, HONPA HONGWANJI is the most progressive, the most active, and the one with the greatest influence compared to the other Buddhist denominations. So talk about being having a social dharma. Rose Nakamura and I were just kind of laughing about. She said, "Oh, I remember when you said years ago we need a social dharma," and I said. And you're it. You are the social dharma right here. Yeah, HONPA has done more than I think any other denomination. But once again, the test of effectiveness is really going to be in the temples themselves. Are the temples growing or are they dying? Despite these good programs, is it enough? Or do we need to do more? Or maybe it's not just a matter of quantity, maybe it's quality, maybe it's more like, what was said a little bit earlier, that there has to be something a little more specifically religious about what HONPA does, not just all these, kind of social programs. And yes, normally I do not write my speeches out, but I knew that question was going to come up. And so I have it here. I'll email it to Alan, and you can get it from Alan, and you can disseminate it any way you want.